Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. On today's episode of me talking about stuff and things, I am going to be going over the first episode of Apocalypse, a new spin-off where 12 people try to survive in a very desolate area in South Africa, and we shall see if they make it to day 35. Is this replacing Excel or is this a new fun spin-off? We will know probably by next year. And as I said, Naked and Afraid Apocalypse is 35 days. We have 12 survivalists, and I will be going into more detail in a second. But before I continue, please check out the links in the description below. And I would also like to say, please do not send hate to any of these survivalists. Please send support to your favorites. I don't know how much the survivalist attitudes are going to change with a bunch of people bombarding them with negativity. There may be some constructive criticism in there. There may be some edits going on that could be affecting people's view of them, but please do not send hate to the survivalists. Now, the episode is called Starting at the End of Days. We have 12 survivalists, and I'm going to be going over which survivalists are going to be on, plus the number of days, and then I'm going to be going on to the episode. Now, since there are 4 different groups, I didn't want to go through the episode chronologically and just say this group is doing this, now switch to this group. I'm going to go group by group and day by day. So on day 1, I'll talk about the group in zone 1, and then the group from zone 2, 3, and 4, or whichever group appears first, and then so on and so forth. Now, the 12 survivalists are Stephen Lee Hall Jr., who has 272 days, Frank, who has 35 days, and Alexa, who has 21 days. They are in Zone 1. Zone 2, we have Waz, who has 140 days, Russell with 75, Teal with 21. Then we have Zone 3 with Wes with 96 days, Stephen Kelly with 21 days, Miranda with 21 days, and then in Zone 4 we have Amber with 146 days, Joe with 21 days, and Kelly with 21 days. Now, we see each team before they are inserted and commenting on the environment. Each group inserts into their respective zone. Everyone gets their bags and are given 1 item each plus a pot and a fire starter. There is an 80-mile perimeter of vast wasteland that are separated into 4 zones that the survivalists start in, and they start in the south of the zones, and then they must work their way north, and it's not a quote-unquote extraction, it's just them escaping and getting back to civilization. Will they merge? We shall see. It would be great to see some of these survivalists interact, and it wouldn't be great if, say, one of the trios has 2 people tab, and so it's just 1 person for the rest of the 35 days. So hopefully we can see some merging going on in the later episodes. And so day 1, the survivalists make their way to scavenging sites before heading to water to make camp. Stephen, Alexa, and Frank go to check out an abandoned mine before heading to a water source near abandoned vehicles. They are able to get a wedge and a canary cage. They then walk around a junkyard, which has a bunch of junk cars that they could use for a shelter. And then we get some of Frank's backstory about his ingenuity, and he's a hunter. Then they start making a boma and see a bull elephant near their water source. And then we get some backstory on Alexa, and she mentions how in 2017 she flatlined while getting a routine hip replacement but was resuscitated. And then the group decides to make a boma made of car parts to help deter large animals, including the bull elephant they saw earlier. And unfortunately for Frank, he gets caught in his hand, but a medic cleans it up, and Frank has had a tetanus shot within the last few years, so he'll be fine. And then they finish making their boma. 4 miles to the east in Drop Zone 2, there's Waz, Teal, and Russell, who go check out an unknown structure before heading to water near an abandoned farmhouse. They find wires, bottles, mud flaps from a car, and sheet metal to take with them. And Russell is unfortunately being negatively affected by the heat and really needs water, and he sits by some shade, and Teal and Waz explore the house near their water source. And because there are bats inside the abandoned house, they're not able to go there because they may get some kind of bacterial infections due to bat guano. And so basically, Teal and Waz build a shelter around where Russell is sitting and try to make it the most comfortable for themselves. And then we get some of Russell's backstory about having tiffs with past partners and how he is good at hunting. And then he builds a fire and has to rest for a little bit because the heat is really draining him. And then later that night, it's a little bit cold, and Waz, Teal, and Russell only have a fire on the outside of their shelter, so they're not really able to warm up. And then 10 miles to the east in Drop Zone 4, Amber, Joe, and Kel seek out an abandoned medical facility, then must track 5 miles to a water source near the ruins of a hunting lodge. We get some of Kelly's backstory about her being widowed at 20 and taking care of her 2 kids. Joe finds a wheelchair to help carry supplies and managed to fix it because one of the wheels wasn't able to stay on. They then find an abandoned building near their water source and do a perimeter check. And then there's a lot of talk of the heat and the thorns, and Joe wants to take the tires off of a cart so that they can make shoes. And then we get some of Joe's backstory and how he knows the heat because he's a firefighter and is used to working in heated and scorching environments. And then he talks about most of his 21-day challenge, he spent it alone because his partner, Candace, tapped out on day 5, and he wants to prove that he can survive anywhere. And then there's a little bit of drama because Kelly spots a monitor lizard, and she wants to know if they want to dispatch it so they could eat it later. And Amber and Joe are like, yes, let's dispatch it so we can eat it later. But then Kelly goes on to explain how they don't really have a fire to cook it, and she doesn't want to leave it after dispatching it. And Joe gets a little bit irritated with this because he's like, do you want to let it go or not? And he also suggested using sort of a leash or a harness, and Kel was saying no because the neck kind of leads into the head, so it would probably slip out. And so Joe's like, okay, let's not, because Kelly was explaining why it wasn't a great idea to dispatch it, even though it was kind of a 2-to-1 vote of taking it out to cook it up later. And unfortunately, Amber is very uncomfortable with the banter between the two, and the trio makes their way to water with 2 hours of daylight remaining, and they find a charcoal burner or a kiln, K-I-L-N, and they use that to make a temporary shelter. It's basically a giant metal tube. And then Kel makes a fire. And then in Drop Zone 3, Wes, Miranda, and Stephen Kelly have an abandoned structure they can scavenge from, but they decided to go straight to their water source and save that for another day. We see Miranda's backstory of her being a charter boat captain, and she's used to being around water. Miranda makes a fire, and the group set up a boma in the abandoned structure near their water. And they have a structure with 3 walls and then kind of have material in front of it, and then they use material to plug up a hole. Day 2, and Amber and Joe make shoes. Joe makes a funny comment about how their feet are tired, so they must tire their feet, and Amber kind of laughs at that. And then they decide to build another shelter elsewhere, and then they find a nice tree to build a boma that's about a quarter of a mile away from their water source. And unfortunately, Joe and Kelly bicker a little bit more because Kelly was talking about how there's some barbed wire in his path, and Joe was saying how he has shoes and he'll be fine. And then Joe doesn't want Kelly to interrupt him, and Kelly doesn't want Joe to talk so much. And so it's a lot of bickering. And Amber works on a fish trap. And then later that night, Joe and Kelly bicker some more about the fire. And then apparently Kelly went to move a stick out of the way of the fire for some reason, and she accidentally hit Joe in the head twice with it. And so according to her, he apparently grabbed the stick and threw it, but they bicker about that, and it did seem like an accident, but getting hit in the head twice with the stick with thorns on it might not be the most pleasant experience. And then Wes's group goes scavenging at the abandoned structure they foregoed the previous day, and they gather some materials, and we get Steven's backstory about him being in the military and his hardworking attitude. And then after the 3 gather materials, we hear Wes talking about how Steven and Miranda have a lack of focus, and he's trying to get them focused so they can hurry up and go back to their boma so they're not traveling in the heat. And Miranda jokingly calls Wes dad. And so that was a little funny, and there's a little bit of humor going on in the group, and they're getting along well. So that's nice. And then the group returns with their scavenged material after an hour of walking. And then Teal and Waz do some camp chores, and Russell is resting due to cramping. And Teal gives her backstory and her bushcraft ability and how she was a former aircraft mechanic in the Air Force. And she uses materials from a couch to protect from the sun and makes her own little outfit. And Waz makes a hook from wire that he found so that he can go fishing with it. And he sets up a passive line with a scorpion as bait. And Russell is feeling better and goes hunting. And after a little bit, he's not feeling well again. And Waz is worried about Russell's lack of contribution, as is Teal. And there was a moment after Russell comes back from hunting Teal saying, wow, you came back super fast. So I think they're both a little bit irritated with Russell not really contributing as much. And then Steven's group goes scouting for animals to potentially eat. And while looking for eggs, Frank manages to find some and they're able to have their first meal. And then Steven works on the bird cage to potentially turn it into a bird trap. And that was mainly all we get for day 2 from them. And then day 3, there's a lot of tension between Kelly and Joe because of the incident where Kelly accidentally hit Joe in the head a few times with a stick. And Russell is resting and Waz and Teal want him to put in more effort to camp chores. And the episode ends. So this episode was a little bit tense with some groups, or I should say one of the groups is arguing. There's tension in another group. One of them is working well together, and then another one is working well together. I feel as though we didn't really get to see much of Stephen Lee Hall Jr.'s group, and hopefully we can see more of them. At least based on the trailers, there may be a moment where one of the group members does something that will get a lot of attention, not in a negative way, but that'll be interesting to see. And so for the number of days as of day 3, Stephen Lee Hall Jr. now has 275 days. Amber has 149 days. Waz has 143. Wes has 99. Russell has 78. Frank has 38. And Alexa, Joe, Kelly, Miranda, Stephen, Kelly, and Teal all have 24. All in all, a decent episode. I will say, please stop sending hate to Russell, Joe, and Kelly. It's mainly Russell and Joe, but Kelly is also getting some negativity. Please stop. I don't think it'll really help the survivalists if hundreds of people are sending him negative messages all the time. So please don't do that. And I'm looking forward to more episodes. I'm interested to see which groups will merge, who will tap out. I think there will be at least 4 or 5, maybe 5. But we shall see what happens. Thank you all so much for listening. Please like, comment nice things, and subscribe. And episode 2 is called No Fury Like a Woman Thorned. And fueled by their fishing, when Waz and Teal scavenge the ruins to build a shelter, West fights a territorial crocodile for control of a fishing spot. Amber battles an eye infection. 2 survivalists are forced to leave the challenge. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. And have a good day. Bye-bye.